Hey, what's up guys? In this video we are going to be going over the chorus, flanger, and phaser audio effects in Ableton Live. These are very common in the guitar pedal world. They're also very common in the production world. These essentially, all three of these, make a copy of the signal and then affect that signal and then put the two copies back together and then you get an effect. So these all kind of operate similarly. The chorus and the flanger are very similar but different, and then the phaser is a little bit different than the previous two. They work with all-pass filters, but it's essentially taking a copy of something and then either delaying it or running it through a filter that an all-pass filter that adjusts the phase of that particular frequency. So let's open up this. I'll just give you a kind of a brief explanation of kind of what's going on here. So yeah, let's just get that in there. This is a little beat situation. Okay, so we have that. We put that in the arrangement view. I'll double click, I'll unwarp it, and let's just give it a listen. Right, that's pretty cool. So let's make a copy of that, and we'll do that by right clicking and then duplicating, and then I'm going to turn off the grid. And yeah, these are essentially stacked on top of each other. And when we stack these on top of each other and then we kind of sum them together, which is what we're going to be doing when we play these both at the same time and we're hearing it, we will get constructive interference essentially. And yeah, they will kind of double up the perceived volume and it'll sound like this. Right? Pretty well understood, right? If we stack something that's a copy of each other on top of each other, they will add into each other, and the math kind of works out. 1 plus 1 is 2, -1 plus -1 is -2. Math, right? Pretty interesting. But what if we shifted that over? Better yet, what if I gave you an explanation of what like destructive interference is? So we have perfect copies of one another, of these particular pieces of audio. What if instead of this part right here going down, or this part right here going down, it went up, right? So if we had, +1 plus -1, we would get 0, right? We'll get, like this interference, and this is called a null. We'll null it out. And we can do that essentially by going into the audio effects here, dropping a utility in this right here, and then we hit this little, I guess, like a circle with a line through it. What that does is that will invert the signal. And this is very useful for kind of live miking drums, I guess. If you're getting something weird, you can invert it because of sound and whatnot. Different topic. But what we're doing is we're essentially, and I'll show you, I will right click this and I will freeze and then I will flatten. Holy man, what do we do here? This is a magic trick. So look at this. What we have is we have essentially, these two things interfering with each other. And do I have these kind of set together? Maybe I do. I probably do. Yeah, we'll see. And we might get some kind of interesting interference effects that way. But yeah, let's look at this, right? So yeah, these are pretty well matched up here. Are they? No, they are not. Oh, they are. Okay. My eyes are deceiving me. So essentially what I'm doing is, yeah, I'm hitting play. And look at that. They're both playing, but we're not hearing anything. If I turn one off, right? It's playing. And I'll hit play, and I'll turn this inverted one. We get nothing. And that is essentially a null. And that's very useful for testing equipment and stuff like that. But what's essentially happening is, these are essentially the same thing, but they're flipped upside down. Like, Australia or something like that. Like, they're perfect interference, and they're just being set to 0, which is silence. Okay, well, what would happen if I shifted this over slightly? right? It's not perfect interference anymore. What we're getting is we're shifting the phase, right? And if we remember, right, phaser, we'll get into that, but we're shifting the phase over, and what does it sound like now? Right? Those higher frequencies are coming through because they're fast enough. The lower frequencies are kind of being flipped around there. So let's just scooch that over more. Right, so now we have more of a realistic delay there, and that is essentially what these effects are doing. I'll give you another example. This is the original piece of audio here. Let's drop in a delay, because delays and chorus and flangers have their roots in delays as well. So we have our delay here, and let's turn off the left and right. We'll sync it to time, right? Because we want it, we'll unsync it from the host tempo, and we'll set it to time. And this is, the lowest it can go is 1 millisecond. That should be okay. And then I'll set the dry to that right there. Let's give this a listen. Right, we hear that little whizziness there. You're going to hear that again. Let's unlink these by hitting that, and then we'll go time, and we'll have the left set to 1 millisecond, and then the right set to kind of, I guess, 2 milliseconds. And I'll kind of adjust it so we can hear it more in a pronounced way. Right, you can't really hear it, right? And once we get to this point, we can hear the two signals more clearly, that separation. But there's a point in which that it's so fast, and what this is doing is this is essentially moving. You know, it has the, you know, let's say, you know, this would be the left right here, and then this would be the right. And what I'm doing is, you know, actually I'll set this to 100% there. So what we have is the left here and the right here. This top part is delayed by 1 millisecond, and then this, the right here is delayed by, you know, 2.54 milliseconds. So we're effectively moving this over, you know, by 1.54 milliseconds, right? That should make sense, because it makes sense to me. And I will clear that. So that's effectively what it's doing. Pretty cool. And we have this awesome feedback knob here, which will give it more of a tone. It'll kind of be fed back into this, and we'll have more of a, let's say, the delay moving along. So it's a little bit more pronounced. So yeah, there's like this, if I move this like so, right? We're getting some flanging effects with a delay. You can do that with a delay. You can do that with, you make a chorus out of a delay as well. But let's get into what we want to do. That's just to briefly give you a primer of what exactly is occurring. We're splitting up the signal, and then we're affecting one of those signals, and then putting them back together, and then there's some constructive or destructive interference going on there. So hope that makes sense. Let's get rid of that. And yeah, let's take a look here. So let's look at the chorus first. So the chorus is essentially a thickening agent. It's an emulsifier, I guess you can say. And what it is that delay that we just did, but it's the pitch of that is being modulated, and it's modulated by the amount here. And I think it might be actually a little bit better if I this over to arrangement. I'll turn the grid back on. Get that over there. Bob Ross in the house. Okay. Okay, cool. So there we have it. So we have visualization going on here and all that fun stuff. So this is the chorus. So we have the pitch of one of these channels. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's the right. And what the chorus is doing is it is moving it back and forth relative to this top position, and it's kind of moving it back and forth like I was doing with the delay a little bit ago. And that is dictated by the amount and the rate, right? So 0.54 hertz. So, every, I guess, it makes a cycle every half second. No, it takes 2 seconds around there to, make a full kind of modulation sweep between this point and this point. And the depth, the amount that it will delay is set to 0.48 milliseconds. So yeah, it's better if you actually kind of hear it. So let's do that. Right. And yeah, the amount is kind of it's kind of we call it the depth of the chorus. It's just how separated left and right one of those will be. Let's bring it up to 6.5. Right, it's doing some pretty cool stuff. I'll get the wet all the way up there. Right, and it's giving it some thickness. And it's not like the delay that we were using. Remember the delay we had? We had it like kind of like this. And if you have it set to, let's have it set to like 5.51. Right, we hear that it's kind of not moving. It's kind of unnatural. It doesn't sound like it's like a chorus. So a chorus would be like one or two people singing. They're singing and their pitches are different slightly, or two or more people, and they're all kind of summed together. You get some constructive, some destructive, and that's why there's different sections and stuff like that. Gives it a thicker sound, and this is what the chorus is doing. It makes guitar sound pretty dope as well. So yeah, the rate is the modulation kind of speed of me moving this value here, essentially, and then the amount is the kind of modulation depth. Hope I've explained that correctly. So there's all that. We can give it a kind of a faster rate as well. And it gets kind of washy. And then we can bring the amount down. And there's kind of a sweet spot. It might not work that well on drums, but sounds pretty neat indeed. So that's a basic kind of a rundown. Chorus you can make with a delay, you can make it with a delay, and that's essentially what's going on here. We have delay 1 and delay 2. Holy crap, what's going on here? So the delay 1 has this neat little high pass filter, and that will kind of clean up the low end. Sometimes you might not want to have effects on the low end. It can make your bass kind of, wishy-washy and muddy, not that great. But yeah, essentially, we have a delay amount here. So let's say the delay is, 5.23 or whatever, and the amount, it will go, positive or negative 1.28 around this value here, right? And I'll just turn delay 2 off. And that's essentially what's going on here. Right? So the high pass is doing that. And we can mix in the dry signal as well. Right? All well and good. The delay 2 is in conjunction with that other delay. We can have it at a fixed, we can either have it off, right? And that's more of like a classic kind of mono tape chorus kind of thing, because that's what they used to make the first couple of choruses. Oh, it was a technique they used with tape. Similar thing, very fast delay times. We can have it fixed, right? So fixed would be, like it's 4.15. This is not modulated by the modulation XY control here, but this always is. That's fixed. And then we can have it being modulated as well by the mod section here. Right, super fast delay times there, and that should be pretty well understood. And this works well on kind of maybe like higher frequency material like strings, pads. Choruses sound amazing on pads and things like that, and that's where you would kind of use chorusing. It's kind of like using unison or a little bit of reverb, and it gives it space and it kind of fills up the frequency or the frequency spectrum and the stereo image by having that constructive and destructive interference. Makes your song sound wider and more cool. And then the polarity will set the it says right here sets the polarity from positive to negative. And the polarity changes have the most effect on high amounts of feedback and short delay times, which brings me to the feedback. So the delay has feedback. This also has feedback, right? Choruses are essentially just really fast delays. Right, so we're hearing that movement very much so. Bring the rate down. Let's bring that down. And that should work quite well for an explanation of what the chorus is doing. So yeah, it's essentially delaying the signal and affecting it in such a way. And from there we have the wet dry as well. Feedback will pronounce those constructive and destructive interference patterns that you'll see in here. Gives you a really cool effect. Okay, so there's that. Flanger. Flanger is essentially the chorus, but it has faster delay times and it has a super cool LFO section. So the chorus here, it is modulated by a rate that is not tied to any kind of BPM or anything like that. It's just a fixed rate. How many times per second it is modulating, and the amount or depth is how strong that modulation will occur. And that's essentially it, really. Flanger is a little bit more, I guess, deep. We have feedback, right? We didn't have that before. We just have feedback and delay time, right? We kind of know what's going on there. That's what essentially, Flanger is. Same thing as that. There's the envelope, and then there is an amount, right? But let's get into kind of what we're looking at here. So that's a flanger. A flanger needs to kind of move. If it's not a flanger, it's just kind of an EQ, I guess. If that makes any sense. It makes sense to me. Right, so delay time. Very fast delay, 0.1 milliseconds as opposed to 0.01. But then we have the delay here, or something like that. Super fast. Right, does all that fun stuff. We can have the feedback polarity. We can flip it just to give it a bit of a different kind of timbre. Right? And essentially what that's doing is that's just giving you some constructive and destructive interference. And we can see that in our EQ8 here. You'll see these little peaks. See those guys? And that's essentially that. And what makes it kind of special is we have the LFO amount here. And we can modulate the left and right kind of separately using this phase guy here. So let's have it set to sine wave, basic. Right, very slow. We can bring that up to like 1 hertz. Right, just give you a bit of movement there. And then we have all these other different shapes. Sample and hold is also pretty cool. Right, it changed to a width, which would give us a separation between the left and right for that particular modulation. Right, and it's almost like it's adding some like pitch to it, which it is because it's accentuating certain harmonics and not others. But yeah, let's move along to this. Let's set it to a strong amount there. Right now it's at hertz, so 1 times per second. It is kind of doing this modulation sweepy thing. Right, which is pretty fast for a flanger, but you know, you hear this all the time on electric guitars and stuff like that. We can set it to a rate. Right, so it's more kind of predictable. Have it set to 1 bar. So that sine wave cycle will kind of be consistent throughout a bar. I'll have it set to that. So it'll just finish its cycle right here, and then it'll restart and then finish it through this. Right, kind of like that or something. Yeah. Can't draw. Let me do that. So yeah, actually that's better. Something like that. It's hard to draw. This pad's very small. So it's like, you know, just kind of goes along in that way. And we have the phase here, which is pretty cool. What it will do is it will separate the left and right and have that phase upside down. So we'll have, you know, we'll have one kind of sine wave to the left going this way, and then the other going that way. And you'll be able to hear that right now. Play. Right, so you can get like this kind of wide converging and, you know, this really cool sound for the left and the right. Right, and the offset will do another neat thing. What that will do is it will offset this 180 degrees. So a wave is essentially separated into degrees. And I'll give you maybe an example of what that is. So I'm going to go into automation, and I'm going to set that to there. So I've put in a sine wave. I'll show you how to do this later, probably, unless I already have. So yeah, we have a sine wave modulation thing here. So these waves have a duty cycle, right? And at the beginning here, right, that would be 0 degrees, and then over here, right, this would be, you know, 360 degrees. Right in the middle, right, for those that used to skateboard, this would be 180 degrees, right? And then we have like 270 and all that sort of fun stuff. And it's how we represent these sine waves. These sine waves, and any kind of wave that has a duty cycle, is seen as a circle, right? It's just a circle. And I'll give you little bit of a sneak peek situation here, right? Ableton Live already kind of does this. And I think, yeah, it's just a smarter way to think of these waveforms. Waveforms are essentially circles. And I'll do that like so, right? So we have, these shapes, and these shapes are circles. And yeah, let's find, yeah, this is a sine wave. And a sine wave, essentially, yeah, it's just a circle. Kind of just goes in a circle there. And it's dictated by degrees. So what I was getting at is the phase. We will have one sine wave kind of like so. And then I will set another, duplicate this. Right, so I want to shift, maybe shift this sine wave. I'll just cut that. I'll shift this sine wave 180 degrees from that one, right? And this is essentially, no, that's not shifted 180 degrees. What am I doing? This is shifted 180 degrees. This is what it looks like. And I will go like that. Okay. So yeah. No, that's not shifted 180 degrees. 180 degrees is, yeah, it's how I originally had it. Set it like that. Yeah, so that's shifted 180 degrees, right? So we'll get some interesting interference when it goes high, it goes low. When it goes low, it goes high. And, with that kind of being said, if we offset it by 180 degrees, it'll sound like this, right? And that's all well and good. But if we have it set to, something like 90, 94, it'll kind of lag behind it, and that'll be pretty cool. And then the phase separation between the 1 and 2 will kind of compound that, and we'll get like this really cool effect. Right, a very fast, cool effect, but an effect nonetheless. Right, and with the rate, we'll go rate 4. Now we'll go 2. Right, that's essentially the flanger. So think of the flanger as a more of a deeply controllable chorus. Like a chorus has its roots in tape and adjusting the speed of tape, and they weren't able to do that with like precise sample accurate LFO amounts and stuff like that. It was just, a rate and an amount of depth. And that works well. But then the flanger, it's a different thing, and we have control over the left and right, and it's more kind of, I guess, futuristic, for lack of a better term. Anyway, let's get into the phaser. So the phaser, it will split the signal, but it doesn't delay it necessarily. It doesn't delay the frequency. No, it doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't delay the signal in terms of time, but what it does is it shifts the frequency around a point using all-pass filters. So phaser is not so much shifting the phase, but what it's doing is it's just doing some neat stuff to give you an interesting sound. And the poles dictate how many filters there are. And you can get some really cool sounds with this. So again, we have the LFO, sample and hold, with the rate and the phase. I'll just turn those down. We have the envelope as well, which reacts to the sound being fed into it. We have frequency, right? And this is not the frequency of modulation. It is the kind of frequency of your, frequency. Say EQ8. We can select the frequency. That's what it's doing. This isn't how much it's being modulated. That's controlled by the LFO here. So yeah, let's dive into that. It's essentially a bunch of filters put together, and it sounds like this. Right, so we have, yeah, the frequency selection there. The poles will dictate the kind of intensity of that. Right, so we see this little dip here. I hope you can see that. Right, see that dip? Right, so we're getting some negative things going on here, and it's essentially, for the most part, it's essentially just kind of doing this with a notch filter in your EQ8. And that works quite well. And we actually used to do that on, say, the old viruses, because they didn't have a whole lot of effects in there. We did that with the Nord too. The Nord had some filters that would kind of mimic this sound. So, yeah. Actually, I should put that back there. This is essentially what it's doing. Right, and that's with just one kind of notch. We can give it more poles, which means kind of more filter. Right, but they're all kind of, going down, right? But then the feedback is getting these kind of peaks to constructively interfere with each other, right? We got constructive and destructive just with the phase of with the frequency, and that's essentially what's going on there. And that's all well and good. And that is with, I guess, the Earth situation. And this will adjust the timbre of the, I guess, yeah. What does it say? It says, yeah, it changes the color of the sound. I kind of know what this is doing, not exactly. But what it does is it, instead of kind of reducing that frequency, it's boosting it. So we're getting space, which is a different timbre. So the feedback is more pronounced, right? And we're getting these interesting harmonics. Very, very spacey. And that's with the amount of poles. We can have one pole. And then we can have 8. And what that's effectively doing is, I'll give you kind of an example here. We're just setting up a bunch of peaks. And we're just moving it. More or less. Right? Yeah, that's what that is doing. And the Earth section of the phaser, it has a color, and this will, I guess, it'll adjust the phaser's timbre. So I guess what it does is it will kind of spread out and give it more of a deeper cue for those filters. Oh, no, it spreads them out. I want to actually really explain this. Maybe I'll get that wavetable open again. And I'll just move this and this. I will copy, and then I will paste. Right? Okay. All right, so I have the phaser on there. All right, so we can see that we have our poles here. And here it is without. You can see it's very uniform. And turn on the phaser. And then we have these dips and all that fun stuff. When we adjust the color, what that is doing is that is essentially adjusting the ratio between, those peaks, right? So we're still going to get, we'll get some more poles in there. We're adjusting, where those peaks fall depending on the frequency. And, a lot of the Ableton Live devices, they're really deep, and there's a lot of options under the hood. You have access to everything. So like a phaser on a guitar pedal, it would have like, 2 knobs, essentially 2 or 3, plus a switch. But this, you can really kind of get into it, and that's with the phaser. So the phaser, just as a refresher, these all may seem like the same thing. They kind of are, but they kind of aren't. The chorus and the flanger are very similar, and that's because they're very similar to a delay. So the delay, chorus, and flanger are all essentially the same thing, but with different kind of modes of operation, and we've gone through that. The phaser is a specialized filter, and that filter does some wacky stuff to the kind of the phase of what it separates out, and what'll really kind of bake your noodle is when you start to realize and learn that EQs essentially adjust the phase and mess with the phase of particular bands, and that's how they get that destructive interference to kind of filter out or boost. It's really, really quite nutty. But yeah, one thing I should kind of point out is, again, phaser can be modulated, and the rate can be fast or slow, it can be synced, got your phase, got your offset, all that fun stuff. Right, we can make that a little bit slower. And the wet dry is also very important as well. Right, so it can be subtle, it can be extreme, and you can get some really cool sounds out of that. I think I've rambled on enough about these. They're very important effects, and I find that they're very useful in kind of low doses, right? And for example, and I'll probably get into this in a later video, you have your, say, reverb. You have something sent to a reverb. You can have a chorus after that reverb to further make that reverb kind of thicker and wider, and sound kind of give it a bit more, I guess, life with these effects. And I always tell people, it's like, don't use an extreme effect at 100%. Use 100 effects at 1%. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's very useful because it's easy to kind of overuse these and stuff like that. But I'm doing this just for the sake of example. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. That was the chorus, flanger, and phaser. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one.